got a really great treat for you guys next. We have 3 former state CIOs who are going to join us, and they're going to share a little bit about what they wish they knew back when they were CIOs. So I'd like to welcome to the stage Kristen Russell, Karen Robinson, and Claire Bailey.
We love following the comptroller.
We do, because we ask them for lots of money.
Exactly. How are you guys doing? Are you having fun? You're all spread out everywhere.
Do you know who we used to be?
Yeah. What are you guys doing up there? Up there?
There are groups.
The rafters, yeah.
Oh, they were in the green room.
So my name's Claire Bailey, and I'm the former Chief Technology Officer for the state of Arkansas, and I had that role for about 8 years. I served for Governor Mike Huckabee on his cabinet and Governor Mike Beebe, a Democrat, on his cabinet. And then I most recently joined Compuware as their federal, state, and local director of, wait for it, mainframe solutions. Thank you.
We still love her.
Yeah,
okay,
awesome.
And you are?
Hi, everyone. I'm Kristen Russell, and I'm the former Secretary of Technology and CIO for the state of Colorado. I actually had 2 roles in Colorado. As Secretary of Technology, I led the state's economic development strategy, so attracting new tech workers and tech companies to the state of Colorado. And then I also oversaw all of the IT functions across the state. Colorado is actually one of the few states that is actually completely consolidated by legislation. So there was only one state CIO, and that was me. And now I'm with Deloitte Digital. I actually lead our national strategy for digital government. So I work specifically with state and local, as well as higher education clients, on how to reimagine the future of their business through a digital lens. So social, mobile, cloud, content, and analytics.
And my name is Karen Robinson, and I was the former Director of Administration and Technology in the Governor's Office in Texas, and then the former CIO for Texas for 5 years. And you are a lot more ahead of us in our consolidation process, so I followed your model and tried to get it all under my churn, and I think it's going there now. It's good. I appreciate that, that leadership.
So we wanted to come and talk to you about some of the challenges that we saw around big data in government, and we'd love it to be very informal, especially because there's not too many in the room, so we'd love to kind of throw it back to you guys for questions that you have. But some of the things that we dealt with, and a couple stories that we can share from our time in state government, and well, actually, why don't you start? Why don't you start with what you did?
So it was always fun to travel with Kristen, because in a lot of ways we have a lot of fun. But one of the things that was most interesting is, in my state we were decentralized, so we had, for a population of just under 3 million people, we had over 100 agency level CIOs. So for me to be able to execute upon any strategy, I had to work with my goodwill. I'm a hugger. I actually scared one of the former speakers when I hugged him as he came off stage.
He said, "Why are people hugging?"
Why did I get hugged when I left? I think that's
She's a speaker groupie.
So with that, when you do not have the authority, yet you have the responsibility for moving a strategy forward, it becomes very challenging. And I remember the day when we hosted a quarterly information technology meeting, and Steve Ellsworth from Socrata came in, and he spoke, did a beautiful job. We had many other speakers there as well. And I was very excited, because just introducing the concept of data and open data to the state of Arkansas was just, I couldn't think of anything more exciting to do on that day. And at the end of the session, I would get very energetic, and I stand up and I said, "Wasn't that great? Now, who out here across our agencies is ready to jump in and share data?" And not a single person raised their hand. Mm-hmm. And with that, I learned without support. Now, we did have pockets, and we'll talk a little bit about that as we move further down, but with pockets of big data, how successful can you be? But also without executive support, it's critical. So because I'm going to probably throw it over to KK, because we'll end with
Yeah.
Kristen in Utopia. She was the only CIO.
So if we were going to do easy support, hard support, and I had middle of the road support. So Texas has 27 million citizens, and then I had 336,000 state employees and probably 130 CIOs to deal with. But I had a similar churn, I'll say. Socrata came and approached us, and I really liked the team and felt like we could build that relationship and really start working with the data that we had. And I had to go up to the governor's office, obviously, and sell them on the data, on that idea. And I got the blank stare. You're going to do what with all our data? We just want to make sure it's in Texas. And I said, that's a different data. It's all protected. We're just going to share the data. And so the slow churn, so I worked very closely with our portal vendor and Socrata, and we did a pilot project. And I think that had a slow churn at the beginning, and now that I've gone, and I left in December, I think it has picked up, and I think the project is becoming more and more successful. So mine was a slow start, walking through molasses, getting that churn, and getting the buy-in, and showing the proof of concept, and now I think they're off on their own. They're running well.
That's great. So in Colorado, when I was appointed by Governor Hickenlooper, one of the first, 30, 60 days on the job, he brought me into his office and he said, Kristen, we've got to do, open data, open government, transparency. Let's start publishing, the checkbook and, the budget and things like that out onto the website. And I was like, Governor, that's just not that interesting, right? I mean.
You actually said that to your governor?
I did, of course I did. You know me well enough. I said, that's just not that interesting. I don't think that that's really what citizens care about. I said, what about if we open sourced data to citizens? So I said, think about creating a marketplace. So we launched, with the help of Socrata, the Colorado Information Marketplace. And the concept was very, very different. It was about releasing data sets into the wild. And it was letting people, developers, mash that data set, graph it, download it, create apps, whatever they wanted to do with that data set. And the other cool thing that we did was we actually crowdsourced it from the perspective that citizens, constituents, businesses could rate it. They could say, this is a thumbs up, this is a good data set, this is a bad data set because it wasn't updated. We actually merged in Google's API so that we could graph things and make it more interesting to look at. And they could also request data sets. And so I said, let's just let the data be out there and then see what happens. And within 6 months, the number of data sets that went out onto the Colorado Information Marketplace went up 200%. And just as an example of just how if we really start to think about government using new technologies and transforming this concept of, going from big data, which is interesting but not that interesting, to applicable deep data, where we can actually create new information, new businesses. So the #1 hit data set on the Colorado Information Marketplace, any guesses? I always get that, right?
Which one?
The marijuana. Marijuana.
Is that legal now?
It's legal in Colorado.
In case you haven't heard.
And I will tell you guys, Colorado is the
Parks.
#1 state in the country for 25 to 35-year-olds migration spot. But we had that prior to the legislation of marijuana.
Sure,
Okay, I'll
you
just
always
tell you
say
guys that. No, but it was number of black bear sightings. And so when you think about the power of using new technologies to get out of the way, nobody cares about the budget or the checkbook. I mean, people do, but people want information from government that they can actually use in their lives. And so if you think about government being the crown jewel of big data or deep data and getting out of the way. So now today, Colorado sponsors these apathons and hackathons on the data set, right? So we have developers come in, we give them pizza and beer and they create apps all weekend. So if my department tried to do that, one, it would take millions of dollars and like 10 years. I'd be dead by the time they created their first app. But they did in one weekend, they did an app for all the, food markets across Colorado. So those are that's the power of being able to use new technologies. But certainly, even though my state was very highly, centralized, and I had a lot of control in Colorado, I still dealt with a lot of the things that you're talking about because government was developed in silos. They were developed by agencies, and we had 2 agencies that said, well, this is my data.
So that was pushback that you had.
Yeah, for sure. I remember Medicaid, the Medicaid department, right, delivering Medicaid to citizens of Colorado in need, and the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment, they had the birth and death certificates for the state. So literally every 6 months, CDPHE would drive a file, like a disk file, over to the Medicaid department in Colorado, in Denver. I'm not kidding you, it's true. Sorry. Every 6 months and say, here, now you can download all the people that have died over the last 6 months. Well, guess what? We were paying Medicaid claims on people that were deceased. So then we'd have to, because the drive was a long, 10-minute drive. And people had died during that, over the 6-month time period. So then we had to try to get, the monies back from the families of the people that we were paying Medicaid claims on. So that's just but when I went to the departments and said, do you guys get this? This is ridiculous.
It's my data and you can't touch it.
It's my data, you can't touch it. We are obligated to have that data. And I would literally stand, and luckily I did have the support of the governor. I said, it's not your data.
Those are data huggers.
It's the citizen data. It's data huggers.
Yeah.
So shifting back over to the Arkansas environment, one of the things that we all know, everyone in this room understands, is that how do we drive effective decision making? And from the government perspective, it is identifying what truly works. So you get all these wonderful leaders. We have some campaigning right now to be our president. And they have all these wonderful ideas on how to change the world, or how to change the state, or how to change the city or the county. And part of what we saw in Arkansas was what truly was a game changer for us. So I happen to love statistics, strange but true, and it was real easy to track Arkansas statistics because guess where they ranked in education? Mississippi. And sometimes Louisiana, but that's a joke that we try not to tell. But so you saw a lot of funding come into education, and you saw a lot of things happen around education. And we were actually had one of the top longitudinal, I can't even say that word.
I don't know.
Can you say
longitudinal?
Yeah. So it's because I'm Southern. But we had one of the greatest areas of study around educational policies that actually worked. And then from there you saw the trends, you saw the things that you could shift funding to ensure that you were putting dollars to really help the children of Arkansas and to give people hope and to see that there are ways to grow from where you started. And so even though I did not have executive support nor could get the data huggers to let go, we were able to move the state forward in specific areas by understanding analysis of what works across public policy. To me, the other side of that is who decides what data group is most successful? I'm asking you in the audience. Who actually drives data?
In any corporation, in any organization.
Or just what makes data successful?
Shout it out.
Okay, consumers, right? Citizens. You make data successful. And when you get out there with the energy that you have now and you're searching and looking for that right answer from your governments or what actually works, you are the driver of that information.
I think, one of the things that I figured out, in the 5 years that I was CIO is when I first came on, it was a nice to have. It was nice to have this data at your fingertips. And then it became a must-have because the citizens demanded it. Whether it was in South Texas, where we were having border concerns and park visits and trying to get education online because folks could not afford to go to school, and because they were accountable for their families and the welfare of their immediate families and taking care of them and shopping and then we were trying to build up education certifications so that these kids could go to school online, and there would be a movement around putting the data that they needed to be successful and to get these programs or get these certifications. In the north, in Amarillo, we were having snowstorms, and you went from drought, and then in Houston area you're having hurricanes, so we had all of this data to figure out, and it took a lot of continuity and then that relationship building. So I had to pull in not just the state folks, but the local CIOs as well, and build those relationships in order to get the trust. And then they would wind me up and push me through the doors to go into testifying before the legislature and then to meet with the leadership at the governor's office. So it took a lot of time and a lot of that citizen input. And it took putting those, what do we call them? We were talking about it at lunch, the citizen community, God, I can't even remember, but we put the groups together where we all had an input, and it became owner operated. So it was not just me pushing down their throats what they needed to have, it was me turning it so that the users and the consumers were at the top helping me make those decisions, and then it was owner operated.
Yeah, I think you both bring up really important points. I mean, one is the importance of actually measuring the effect of data. Right? So if you think about public policy or politics, it's been steeped in a tradition of who can be the best orator, who can actually convince other people to do things. And yet, when you really think about the language of persuasion, if you can use data, data is kind of the baseline. I was sitting next to this guy on a plane, and he was reading a book in Chinese. And I took a picture of the book because I couldn't read anything on the page.
Do you always read over the shoulder of others?
Yes, I do, on planes especially. Watch out. But I knew what page number he was on because I knew what 56 meant. And so if you think about the importance of measuring data and the effect of data, that's really important. And the other thing that I would say too is no longer are the days that the data is contained within the walls of your organization. And that is so true in government. In the last 2 years, actually, universally, we've increased the amount of data that we have since the beginning of humankind by 9 times in the last 2 years. So what that means is that it's the data not just contained by government, but everything around us. And I think about a world when the caseworker for child welfare services is pulling in data from all sorts of feeds. The kid that tweets out, "I'm going back to my dad's house." So guess what? If we know that the dad's house is not a good environment for that child, we don't have that data unless we start pulling together that data. So again, that caseworker using just the data that she or he has may not get that case may not top to the highest priority. But if they know that the child's going back because they actually bring in social data to say, oh, you know what? This case now moved to the top. So it's not even just looking at the data inside the house of government, it's looking at all the data around us that we can provide better services to the citizens of our nation.
That's one of the decision factors for my changing career, is because being a state chief technology officer, state CIO, we rebranded it in Arkansas because of some history around the CIO's office. But there was part of what we miss as leaders, and so one of the things we wanted to talk about with you today is looking back, what would we have wanted back then. So one of the decisions I made about joining Compuware, which is a mainframe-specific company and the backbone of a lot of the technology platforms, I don't know why you're laughing.
COBOL's cool.
It is cool. Hey, and now we've got Z-Linux.
Trying to find millennials.
We do.
Mainframe.
But when you talk about that mainframe environment, I couldn't get the right data to make effective decisions about platforms. And then the other side of that is, how do you make data access ubiquitous? What you shouldn't, the world, and from a citizen's perspective, could care less what system it's in, whether it's city, state, or federal. All they know is, I want to know what you know about me. Shockingly enough, they may not really want us reading their tweets as a government official. Shock.
They do, actually. Millennials have a totally different
That's true.
viewpoint on sharing information and the sharing economy than I think our generation did.
Yeah.
That's
So
true.
if we, so looking at the title, it says, "What I Wish I Knew Then." Lessons. So what?
Yeah, what would be your lesson?
What would be your
Or what would be the thing that you would say?
if you knew then what you know now?
I'd be a much more effective CIO, and mainly it's in listening to and taking in all the factors of decision making across a lot of different groups. And there are times that you find yourself working with partners who may not really be your partner. There are other times where you wish you had listened to others more effectively to make that decision. I think also that I've recognized that karma, how you treat one another or how you treat the world, comes back to you. And so luckily, CIO means, who knows what CIO means? Y'all are so quiet.
What it stands
They're
for?
so quiet.
What?
That's one.
Chief Information
Information,
Officer.
or career is over. Yeah.
Yeah.
So we are.
Especially in public sector.
So the average tenure was 23 months. So you saw this churn as a good example. So we made it to the other side. And when I think about the why part, we probably embrace partnerships more so than others.
Yeah.
I still think, even though you get, particularly in the public sector, you start thinking, my gosh, I am the smartest person in the room, because people laugh at all your jokes, even though they're not funny. And the reason is, you're a key decision maker.
And you're just signing a contract.
There were times that you found people were just making you feel that way, and then not really executing for that strategy for the right reasons. So I think I would read people better.
Yeah.
And I think I would define better partnerships. I know I would do deeper research. And then luckily, we all worked together and shared ideas. And if I was from a very small state, and sometimes people, vendors who I will not name, would not be forthcoming with me, or they would not help me achieve those strategies. And I would say, well, my best friends are from Colorado and Texas and the state of California, Carlos Ramos, who is not here with us today. And that helped me make more of an impact in decision process. Sorry that we have to do that, but I will find that I would probably leverage that even more looking back.
I totally agree with everything. And we talked about listening. I think listening to the solutions that the vendors would bring in is really important. But another thing that I would always ask my vendor partners is to read our state strategic plans or the IT framework and be prepared, because you have something, a gift that you can offer me, or a solution that would make my world easier. And if you've already read everything that I've got, or my top 10 needs, and you come in and say, I fit right here at number 2, I love you. I mean, you've got 10 points right there, and I'm willing to work with you because you've already invested the time to study our plan. I mean, you may not know all the deep secrets, but at least you've aligned your solutions to my initiatives and what I've been looking to do. Another thing is, we talked about listening. I went around and listened to all of my customers. And the customers were my agencies. Their customers were the constituents. And the first 6 months of my life as CIO was so horrific. I might as well have handed out Rotten Tomatoes because apparently things weren't run right before I came on, and there were some things that really needed to be improved upon, and I took that opportunity, and that's when I would bring those folks in and say, well, I need you at the customer table, at the Business Executive Leadership Committee, the BELC is what we called it, and help me make those decisions to right this wrong and to put the state back in a good direction, because Texas needs to be at the top. Not above these guys, but just at the top in leadership as far as technology. And we depended on each other. I mean, Stu from Ohio still calls, and he would mention a vendor and say, are you guys dealing, because they're saying, you know, they're working with you, and I'll say, yeah or no or whatever, but there is that continuity and that communication at the top. So we still are very active at the National Association of State CIOs, and I think that's one of the organizations that's really critical to the success of a vendor.
And Kristen, your path was different from us because you came from the private sector to the public sector and then back to the private sector.
Yeah, so it was really interesting for me because, and I think what I would tell you, so I was at Oracle prior to the state. I ran Oracle's global data centers and computing operations worldwide, and then prior to that I was with Sun Microsystems for many years in global IT service operations roles. And so I think what I learned was that, you know, technology is the easy part, people are hard. And, you know, I'd come in and I'd say, oh my gosh, I know how to solve this. I've solved this 15 ways. And what I realized in government in particular is that it is the relationships, it is a lot of what you guys are talking about, it's the governance. Like, I wish I would have spent so much more time on governance and change management, especially as it pertained to data. And how data would be used, and you know, that work around understanding people and the relationships of people in response to technology versus I know the technology solution and I can implement it. What I found, and especially moving to, you know, we were very progressive in moving to cloud providers and moving a lot of our services outside into the cloud, both SaaS and infrastructure as a service and platform as a service. And what I realized is that it wasn't really about the technology. The technology actually worked really, really well. It was about the people and how they interpreted their role and what was the message and how they needed to, how that changed their jobs. And you know, that's always out there in kind of all sectors, but I think in particular within public sector, it was a really big eye-opener for me.
So one of my data stories deals with education, and Beth Blower came in with Socrata at that time, and she's a very dear friend. And I said, could you just take a look at this data? And I said, can you map, we were looking at how to expand broadband across the state. Do you think that a child's access to broadband impacts educational scores? Does that make sense? Let's see your show of hands.
Yeah.
We're afraid you're asleep.
Yeah.
So you say
Yeah.
you've got to have broadband to have good scores. And those of you who say no, broadband does not.
Oh, interesting. I'd love to hear.
Y'all win. The second, broadband did not have an impact on a child's academic success.
You might have to explain a little bit since the majority went the first way.
That's true. That was an Arkansas joke, and I'll also, what? They're picking on me today. Mainframes in Arkansas.
Could you explain what you mean by that?
So when we talked about that answer, do you think politicians wanted to hear that answer?
Right.
So that's the other part around big data and data analysis in the political world, is you have to accept and understand how that trend would work. Now, since we were, what ranking?
Two.
Yeah, 49th.
Yeah.
Good memory.
Two from the bottom is what I meant, not two from the top, on the second most educated state.
And so from that perspective, what could also be interpreted is think how much better we could be. So again, applying the political policy part for a legislative bill to be passed, to drive that, to make it past those voters in Arkansas to get reelected, to expand broadband because you know how much better your child's life could be. Understanding how we analyze data is critical.
Yeah, that's awesome. So I'd love to open it up to any questions. We have about 10 minutes left. If you guys have any questions for us, I'd love to hear them.
There's one.
Okay,
Great.
shout out.
In the UK, there was a big thing recently, a blog post that said government kills innovation. In terms of your experience of moving between government and private sector, do you agree?
You know, I think a couple things. I mean, government is designed by purpose to go slow, right? So that you don't do things that will create havoc. Having said that, I actually believe and see today that government is doing things that is actually far more innovative than even in the private sector. And that's because they're not constrained by the private sector, stakeholder, shareholder, revenue growth type of and they have such, I mean, this is sad to say, but they have such a low bar, right? And so government failure.
I like going into a government office and waiting for hours just to pay them money so I can have permission to drive.
Yeah, so I mean, what I would say is I don't think government in itself is killing innovation. I think that it's actually a greenfield. I wouldn't be in my position today at Deloitte had I thought that, but what I do think is necessary, and this is what I would say when I was a CIO, is that it's going to require the private sector to step up to see government to help them. And one of the frustrations that I had was, you know, we had lots of vendors and partners that were kind of like the IT cartel that would give you the first free hit for, you know, free, and then you'd be burdened with technical debt and these $40 million checks that you were writing to them. And I was really frustrated that the private sector did not step up to build COT solutions for government and cloud-based solutions. And I think that that's what's going to require us to actually be more innovative in government, to have more agile process, to have more COT solutions that can be delivered. I mean, you think about government, I couldn't go to Office Max and buy a Medicaid system. You know, it's like if you want milk, you go down to the corner store, you buy a gallon of milk. In government, you have to buy the cow, you have to like freaking have a field, you have to groom it, you have to milk it, you have to pasture it. And so the more that the private sector can help by building technology products that can be repeatable across government, that's when I think true innovation will happen. And it's exciting because government does all industries and they drop bombs. When you think about innovation, we have greenfield opportunity to do some really amazing things for not only citizens but for our planet, but we need help.
And one of the things, the struggles that we had, I don't know, you've probably had it too, was educating the legislature on these innovative ideas and these things that actually do work. Because I've been in hearings where the legislator says, why can't I just buy my computers from Best Buy? And you hope that really wasn't a question that you have to answer, because you're not getting that end-to-end support or those maintenances and licenses and that type of thing. It takes those backdoor meetings of educating the legislature and the leadership that this is the way to go. You know,
Great question. What other questions do we have? Yeah.
So I have a question. You were talking about lessons that we can learn from the private sector, but I think that there's also a lesson that the public sector could learn from government, which is diversity.
Yes. Yes.
And have you brought that with you to the company?
Absolutely.
We have in a lot of different ways. One of those things is I have a if you want to follow an innovative CEO, follow Chris O'Malley on LinkedIn,
He's from
Twitter, Compuware.
Mainframe.
He's the CEO. That's correct. And we are bringing sexy back to the mainframe. I'm defending it today. I'm on a panel, and now I'm going to go into debate mode. But to that perspective, when you have a legacy application that will cost you $300 million to replace in a very small state, and does anybody want to pay more taxes to get that done? questions. How do we bring in innovation to maximize a couple of things? One is maximize that intellectual property, but also ease of access to that citizen. In a small state, we had about 40% of our population, their only access to the internet was through their smartphone. If we did not deliver a solution that was accessible off of a mobile application, a mobile platform, we weren't reaching over 40% of our population. And we were requiring them to go in, take a day off work, and I joked about it a minute ago, but to pay your car tags. 8 hours of non-paid, and generally you didn't get any benefit from that. So that ties into making sure that we have that capability to listen and leverage and understand for each of the places that you live across the world, there's a taxation mechanism that paid us to be government employees. And you either liked what we did or did not, but your voice has to be part of that solution. What works for you has got to work.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's two aspects of it. One is there's a diversity problem in public sector as well. So we have this whole concept of the silver tsunami. In fact, across all state government, about 30% of all public sector IT workers are eligible for retirement. So I used to make the joke, you know, not only our systems are old, our workers are old too. And so we have a diversity issue, not only just from a demographic standpoint, but just in bringing in kind of the millennials and how they're looking at the world around them in a very different lens, and how government needs to be responsive. So that's kind of one aspect of it. And then the other aspect of it that I think your question was really more about, which is how do you bring this concept of, you know, public service and public good and what is happening with consumers today into private sector companies. And I think that, you know, I encourage all of you to do a stint in public sector, in public service, because it will fundamentally change the way that you look at the world. And you know, until you have that experience, it's like, you know, how many of you have traveled overseas? Yeah. So, I mean, when you travel, when you have that international overseas experience, you're forever changed. You look at the world differently. And the more of us in private sector that can actually work in public sector and understand the challenges and the people and the legislature and the fact that, you know, people that are homeless, you know, don't have a home, they don't have a computer, and they don't have internet connection, but they have a mobile device.
Absolutely.
That changes the way that you do anything in your private sector company, regardless of whether it's interfacing with the public sector. Great question. Another question. We have a couple minutes.
Karen, you mentioned that at one point there was kind of data at your fingertips went from a nice to have to a must to have. What do you attribute that shift from that time?
I think it was the opportunity to work with folks and then to bring those customers in and sit at the table. And the challenge being at the beginning, you know, I was 20 years in state government, so I did my stint. 5 as CIO.
I did 3, and I was like, enough. It's enough for me.
And
24
it was always, it seemed like a struggle to always get what we needed to get. And, you know, I had kids, and they had things they needed and wanted, and then, you know, my kids were older, so computers when my daughter went to UT, we had to get a laptop. And it became, okay, this is a must-have. So I was living it and seeing it and doing the best I could to reach out and support the citizens. And I go back to South Texas because that's, you know, we have folks and citizens down there, like Kristen was talking about, that aren't homeless, but they're low income, and the challenges, they need to be there to be able to survive. They need to have the things at their fingertips. They need to have the ability to go online and get their driver's license or get a park or whatever the solution may be. So it became that became my argument to the legislators and I would focus on the senator that had that area and say, Senator West, did you understand that your folks really do want this? And then they would get that feedback too. So it was circling the wagons, it was doing a deep dive, and it became a really must-have situation.
In Arkansas, it was interesting because you saw the average age of the legislature change. We have term limits, which, did you have term limits in
Yeah,
Colorado?
yeah.
And you do now in Texas. Ours
We
were-
draw straws now.
You draw straws now? Texas is different. But in Arkansas, you saw the age change. And as much, that doesn't mean that it should be an ageism statement, because that was not necessarily true across all legislators. You had some legislators that were highly driven across how they made decisions, but it became an interesting concept in a legislative committee when they would ask me a question and I would sit in a hearing, much like now, and they'd ask me a question. I'd say, I don't have that answer with me right now, but my staff is right behind me and they're researching it online as I speak. So I'll come back to that question in just a minute. No other agency director would answer a question like that.
Right.
When I did it, that then started the process of saying, hey, actually they'd say, hey y'all, hey, we can get data at our fingertips and that can drive an effective decision versus I'll be back in 30 days with that answer. That changes the world.
Yeah, and
That's what we have to remember is let's change our world.
And I'll give you just a couple quick examples from Colorado. So when the floods hit Colorado, you know, we're a very dry state. We are not used to dealing with floods. So the floods hit and everybody evacuated from the locations and they were trying to understand what was going on with their home. And we had no way of communicating this information to them. And Google Maps, as you may know, especially in remote areas, takes the aerial photographs, but they're sometimes, you know, months old, and so they kept on trying to go out to Google Maps to validate what was happening with their home residents. So we had to very quickly create a technology platform for us to be able to communicate to people within that were trying to connect with each other that couldn't find each other, and also because cellular service was out, a lot of different services were out, but also to find out information about their home. Same thing when my peer was gunned down, murdered outside of his home. Within 24 hours, we didn't have 24 months, we didn't have 12 months, we didn't have 6 weeks. Within 24 hours, we had to get information to the critical first responders and to the cabinet that needed that information. And even on a lighter topic, marijuana. You know, when we passed legislation for marijuana, I mean, you think about it, but this is talking about kind of innovation in government. I mean, government's changing every single day. We passed the legislation on marijuana. We had 6 months to figure out how to create a brand new economic system. You know, when you pull somebody over, how do you determine if they're too high to drive? What's the potential
What do the
content?
airport
What
dogs
do the airport laws do? I mean, what's public smoking? Is it the front porch? Is it back porch? These are real issues that government has to deal with today. So to your point, and I think you said it so well, it's not it's a nice to have, wouldn't it be interesting if we could figure out how to mash this data together? It's like, no, lives are at stake, policies are at stake, revenues at stake, economic vitality for the states is at stake, and that's the reason why it is a must-have.
So if you ever think that data is not critical, we're living proof that it is, and we saw lives changed as a result of it. So we really appreciate your time today.
Thank you.